Folks, Jason Bible, Texas Real Estate Radio Network with the Mr. Texas Real Estate team. Rob and Catherine both are out of town. So that means Brian and I are left to our own devices here. There are no adults currently running the Mr. Texas Real Estate team. So we are on our own for the next couple of days. I don't know when Rob is getting back in town. They're at Disney World. He loves to go during Christmas time. I think they're at Disney World like every other week, or every other month. So they're over at Disney World having a great time. I am here in studio. We're going to talk about how government is funded. If you guys have missed my solo shows where I get on one topic and rant for an hour or two, you're going to like this. If you don't like those shows, probably go find something else to listen to. But today, we're going to talk about how government is funded, because one of the things that I've been watching like a hawk lately, and I sent this out on our email list this morning, is inflation. Inflation is scary, and I'm going to deal directly with economists and their perception of inflation, because I think a lot of these, and I've debated these guys on stage before. Some of these guys have PhDs, 20, 30 years of research experience, academic experience, consulting businesses, and I'm telling you what they're telling you is not entirely correct. I shouldn't say it's not correct. It's something I don't agree with. And we'll talk about that today as the show unfolds. Well, I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. We had a great time. I actually did a bike ride Thanksgiving night. Boys were at the house. I was sitting there at the house, and I'm like, the weather is really great outside. And oh, this is funny. Robert is calling me in the middle of the show. So Rob, for all you folks that whenever Rob gets mad when someone calls the show while we're in the middle of the show, he is calling me right now for the record. So let me send him a note real quick. Just say, hey man, on the show. So in any case, had a great time. Thanksgiving, went out on a bike ride. There was nobody out. I think it was I actually looked up at my Garmin today. My dad and I were chatting on the phone about bike stuff, and I wanted to look at that ride. It was 65 degrees on Thanksgiving night at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. I did a quick 20 miles. There was nobody out on the road. White Oak was a ghost town. There were actually a couple of bars open, which I thought was kind of interesting. But in any case, we had a great time for Thanksgiving. Hope you had a fantastic time with your friends and family here this past week. I know it's been tough because of COVID and maybe family members are locked down, all that sort of stuff. So in any case, hope you had a great holiday week there. So let's talk about how government is funded. Now, don't worry, I'm going to get to the real estate portion of this at the end of the show. But I think it's really important for us to talk about how government is funded and how that impacts you as an investor. So how do governments work? Governments are funded through one of two ways. There's no other way they're funded. This is universally applicable. Whether you're in a democracy or you're in some other form of government, this is absolutely how they're funded. And they're funded two ways. One is through taxation. So you have some government entity, state, local, federal, and they impose a tax on their citizens. Pretty simple concept, right? You've got property taxes, you've got cell phone taxes, you've got sales taxes, you've got, just taxes out the wazoo, right? Income taxes, value-added taxes, you've got trade taxes. That's essentially the little game we're playing with China. China right now is a tax for them to, as a tax when we send our goods there versus when they send their goods here. There's a differential in taxes there. The reality is that not in all cases, but in some cases, the consumer pays 100% of that. That's another fallacy. We may use that for a different show. Maybe I should take that on now. One of the biggest fallacies I think that I see armchair economists say is, well, Jason, when taxes go up, then 100% of those costs are passed through to consumers. And that's not true. There's actually something in economics called deadweight loss. And what that is it's the percentage. There's a certain percentage that's passed on the consumer, And then there's a certain percentage of those taxes that are retained by the business owner through less sales. There's a popular meme out there right now, or meme, however you pronounce it, that says, my rent went up, or taxes went up, therefore my rent goes up. And there's this like picture of this kind of like clueless girl with glasses on, and she's like some millennial, right? And the millennial says, well, my taxes went up. Well, taxes went up. Why did my rent go up? And that's actually not true. I actually spent an entire show a couple of months ago blowing that myth up. Just because your taxes go up doesn't mean your rent goes up. I mean, if that were true, $1 million homes here in Houston, Texas would be renting for $10,000 and $15,000 a month. Well, they don't. They rent for $6,000, $7,000 a month. Well, why not? Because there's not enough demand for them to command a $10,000 to $15,000 a month rent. It's very simple. It's economics. Your cost of doing something has nothing to do with demand. I think a lot of armchair economists get this wrong. Well, Jason, if my property taxes and insurance go up, I'm just going to raise rents. No, you're not. Not unless there's demand that's willing to pay you for those raised rents. Oh, well, if my insurance goes up, I'll just raise rents. No, you can't do that. If you could, you would have raised rents already. The marketplace is relatively efficient when it comes to rental properties for a handful of reasons. You can't mortgage a rental property from a tenant standpoint. It's a cash transaction. With some exceptions, Section 8 is a little bit different. But when we talk about the traditional rental market, it's not as distorted as the homeowner home purchasing market. What's a house really worth if you couldn't get a 30-year mortgage? That's a whole different other show. But I'll tell you this, if your costs increase, you can't just pass on 100% of cost to your consumer unless your consumer has no alternative, which is not the case in housing. They can go to my rental property down the street. So let's go back into the two ways government is funded. One is through taxation. They levy a tax. The citizens in that community pay that tax. And then those taxes are used for whatever social benefit or social good a government has promised to their constituents. Now, you and I can have a very long argument about what government should be doing and what they should not. I would argue they shouldn't be doing 99% of what they're doing. They really shouldn't. Government shouldn't even be what does government not screw up, right? I mean, that's kind of the joke. The second way governments are funded is through inflation. This is the part everybody misses. All the libertarians will run around all day long and talk about taxation is theft. Well, it's theft from who? It's theft from those who are actually paying taxes. Now, you've got to pay some taxes. This thing can't run on nothing, right? We've got to have I know the libertarians get all fired up about this. We got to have some roads. We got to have some public infrastructure. Got to have some cops. Got to have some fire department. I mean, there's certain activities that must take place. Somebody made a really interesting point on a webinar I was watching last night. There were 6 guys on, and one of the things they had mentioned is, this is the longest time in history, it's almost 50 years now, where Europe's borders have not changed, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. There haven't been any wars that have changed the borders in Europe in almost 50 years. Part of that has to do with taxation and commerce and that sort of thing. So when we get back from the break, we're going to talk about taxation and inflation and the war on cash. Jason Bible, Texas Real Estate Radio Network. Welcome back. Jason Bible, Texas Real Estate Radio Network. We're going to talk about inflation today. And I know you're wondering as an investor, like, why? Our show has got to be, every now and then I think our show has got to be the most ridiculous show on radio. In fact, they just moved us to a sports talk radio in the New Jersey market on Saturday mornings. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, here's somebody that, we're bookmarked on either side by day trading shows or market shows or sports show. I mean, it's all kind of random. Some of it's conservative talk. We're on a lot of conservative talk networks. And one day you could hear us talking about Tesla, and the next day we're going to talk about inflation or GDP or, and their impacts to real estate and your portfolio. Really, I do believe you should have more than just real estate in your portfolio. My portfolio happens to be real estate heavy because it's what I do for a living and it makes the most sense to me. But for a lot of you folks out there, I think it makes sense to have some exposure to the financial markets, to the capital markets, to buying some Tesla. I mean, Rob's got a bunch of Tesla right now. But at the same time, I think you also have to have you've got to have your hand in that real estate market. I think it would be hard for me to talk to a financial planner that doesn't tell you not to get into real estate. I mean, that's one thing I think that they're steadfast in, and the data proves it. 9 out of 10 millionaires own real estate. It's just the reality. In fact, if you guys have been watching some of the business news, Tony Hish passed away this past week. I don't even think he was 50. He was a CEO for my generation, if you will. He owned a tech company that eventually got bought out. He got into apartments, and he was doing some angel investing in Silicon Valley, and then ran into the guy that owned a online shoe website that he eventually bought into, and then bought that guy out and renamed Zappos. So if you guys are familiar with Zappos, he recently passed away, unfortunately. And they're not, he got killed. He was killed from a house fire, which is crazy. The guy's 46 and he's in good shape. So we're not going to, the investigation of this whole thing is going to be pretty incredible. So Tony was a real big guy on corporate culture, wrote a book on it. They actually used to teach a class at Zappos headquarters in Las Vegas. And it was one of those things that was on my list to go see because they put on this class. They've got a book. They tell you how their whole company works. It was really, really cool. And unfortunately, he's passed away. But he owned real estate. He owned a bunch of apartment complexes. Guy's a billionaire, I think 800-something million by the time he had passed. But everybody the vast majority of folks who built a sizable portfolio, whether it was in real estate or not, own real estate. So it's something you've got to be exposed to. You've got to expose your net worth and your portfolio to for a handful of reasons. And we're going to talk about the principal one right now. So governments are funded by two means. One is taxation, the other one's inflation. So what do? Governments borrow money and introduce that money back into the economy in a couple of different ways. We don't really need to get into the intricacies of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury and monetization and all that stuff. It really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the dollar has value. It's had value for over 2 centuries now. But the problem is that when you take something of value and you produce more of it, the less valuable it will become. That's just a natural law of things. If all of a sudden Lamborghini took their Aventador and their Huracan. Now these are the Huracan, with a couple of options on it, you hit $300,000 pretty quick. If next year Lamborghini decided, I think we're going to build twice as many Huracans as we did the year before, it's going to have a pricing pressure, a downward pricing pressure in the marketplace. They're probably not going to be able to sell those things for $300,000. They can sell them for $250,000, $225,000. What's the number? When you have something in value and then you produce more of it, the less valuable it will become over time. There's a point at which Lamborghini begins producing so many Huracans that they just become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. We actually see that with phones. You see it with technology, laptops. Now, the newest technology comes out, you got to have the newest thing. But prices of cell phones have come down in years. Prices of laptops have come down. Just as you produce more of it, the less valuable it becomes. The dollar has experienced the exact same thing, and not since we've gotten off the gold standard. Part of it has to do with taxation. The other part has to do with inflation. We just print more dollars. The more money you print, the less valuable it becomes. Now, I say print. They're not really printing this money. I want to say somewhere between 90 and 95% of the physical bills that are produced to replace bills that have been destroyed. So it's not like they're printing, there's like a literal printing press that's printing hundreds of millions of dollars whenever Congress clicks a button, says print more money, or when the Federal Reserve sends their debt over to the Treasury to be bought and says print more dollars. There's not a physical printing press. In fact, since the coronavirus has started, we, quote, printed out of thin air $20 trillion. Now, you're probably wondering to yourself, well, what's $20 trillion? Well, the last financial crisis, over the last 10 years, you got to remember 2008 to about now, it's about 10 years, about 11 years. When they implemented all those bailout programs, the United States government spent about $4 trillion in 10 years. In the last 6 months, just the United States government has spent $20 trillion on the coronavirus. And it's not, most of it is not PPP checks. It's not backing up unemployment. It's not bailing out small businesses. They've literally printed $20 trillion, nearly five times as much as the response to the financial crisis. 3 to 5 times. Here's what's crazy. I can't even get a number on how much money we've printed for the coronavirus. Some say 15, some say 30. Let's call it $20 trillion. Like, there's a dispute. This is how absurd things have gotten. There's a dispute over how much money has been printed. Like, I guess at one point, a few bill here, a few bill there, you end up with $1 trillion. It's not that much money. It's just not at the end of the day. Not at this size, not at this scale. So $20 trillion more dollars are now in the marketplace. And if you don't believe me, go to Shadow Stats. And Shadow Stats will tell you how much more money has been printed over the last 6 months and how that money is making it into the system. So inflation doesn't necessarily mean higher prices. Higher prices don't necessarily mean the cause of higher prices is inflation. A lot of times somebody will say, well, Jason, everything's more expensive now because of inflation. That's not true. The cause of higher prices can be inflation, or it can be just demand. There's more demand in the marketplace. I'm a firm believer that a significant portion of what you're seeing in the marketplace right now, in the single-family marketplace, is higher demand. So when we get back from the break, we're going to talk more about inflation. I'm going to walk you through why you need to be very careful with your real estate portfolios. Jason Bible, Texas Real Estate Radio Network. Welcome back, folks. Jason Bible, Texas Real Estate Radio Network. I got to put my phone on the floor. I'm getting a million text messages. I have to put it on the floor. Maybe it won't vibrate as much. Welcome back. We're talking about inflation. And what is inflation? Let's talk about where inflation is showing up. The United States has printed $1 gazillion. Let's just call it a gazillion. Where does that money end up at? During the financial crisis, a lot of that money ended up backing up balance sheets for banks. It really didn't go anywhere. I mean, truth be told, everybody thought there was going to be this huge wave of inflation, and the money really didn't go anywhere. Backed up some balance sheets. The government went in and bought some companies. And truth be told, I mean, let's be real honest here. And I'd have to go back and look, but I'm fairly certain the federal government made money on GM. They made money on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, bailing all of them out. I mean, it kind of worked. I mean, as much as we want to... Now, should that be a function of government? I think absolutely no. Like, big no. You know, if you go all the way back to the Russian bond crisis with long-term capital management, and when the federal government stepped in and bailed them out, that started this moral hazard of bailing everyone out. Something bad happens, Daddy government needs to come in and write a check. And I don't think that's right. But then again, I'm not running for office yet. So that's a whole discussion for another day. I think the bigger challenge is, what do you do now? The United States has printed $20 trillion. So where does inflation show up? Whenever I talk to economists, they'll go, yeah, Jason, Japan has, their debt to GDP ratio is double, meaning they have twice as much debt as they have in GDP on an annual basis. So, Jason, we could literally double the amount of debt and we'd just be in the same boat as Japan, and it's not any big deal. And I'm like, okay, well, let's discuss that point for a minute. So here, let me explain critical thinking. In order to think critically about whatever the subject is or the challenge, you have to be able to hold two competing ideas in your mind at the same time and argue both for and against both of those competing ideas. In science, they call it the Null Hypothesis. There's your hypothesis and there's the Null Hypothesis, a competing idea. It's not something you're supposed to prove and disprove. It's two competing concepts. It's almost like a fitness test. So you've got these two competing concepts. And one is there's either inflation, or let's say there's no inflation, or if there is inflation, where is it? And I'll tell you, there absolutely is inflation. The problem is when you sit down with an economist, they'll tell you, oh, Jason, you don't understand. We can print all this money and there's not any inflation. I'm like, really? Are you sure? Because I see 4 sectors that have a substantial amount of inflation in them. And they're the 4 sectors that are most important to the American economy. So I may not be able to say, hey, your price of bananas 10 years ago has gone up 50%. Is that inflation? I don't know. Could be, maybe. Maybe there's a lot more people buying bananas. I don't know. But I can live without bananas. Like, I don't have to buy bananas. I don't have to buy potatoes. I don't have to buy rice. But there's 4 things, and there's only 4, that in order to navigate the modern American economy, probably a better way to put it is to navigate the modern Western economy, that I absolutely must have. And I'm telling you right now, that's where all the inflation's at. It's real simple. What are the 4 things that you as an American absolutely must have? And let's start from let's say the age of 16. At 16 years old, what is it everybody wants when they turn 16? A car. Maybe a Lambo. I heard a Lambo is really good car. Savage Geese has a great video on YouTube right now. He's a car reviewer, and he's reviewing the most recent new Ferrari. I'm trying to remember which one it is. A-Rock, what's the most recent Ferrari? Is it a 588? I can't remember. It's the most recent one that just came out. And the funny thing is, and if you guys have never rented exotic cars, if you've only ever been in like your friend's exotic car, you don't realize what a complete piece of crap these things are. But it's the Ferrari. Savage Geese did. It was either the 588 or the 5. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's the last one that's naturally aspirated, if I'm not mistaken, which is a big deal. Everything's getting turbos now. So he's reviewing this car, and it's got all kinds of quality control issues. The dash is shrinking. In fact, the one he's in, like the upholstery is coming apart in the driver's seat, and you're like, you got to be kidding me. You can't. Toyota could put leather in a car that lasts for 300,000 miles, and you guys for your $250,000, $300,000 car, you can't make leather that stays on the seats. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so he said, this is a great car for, your first car when you turn 16. So every kid wants a Lambo or Ferrari when they turn 16. So you turn 16 and you want a car. And I can tell you right now, there is a massive amount of inflation in automobiles. Massive amount of inflation. Now, don't get me wrong. Are they safer than they were 10 years ago? Absolutely. Do they have more technology? Yes. But a significant amount of inflation has shown up in automobile prices. Look at used automobile prices. I typically buy used vehicles. But when I was shopping for my last 3 cars, the difference between new and used was a couple of $1,000. Like my Tundra I bought, why would I buy one used? I mean, a new one is $5,000 more. It was like, just get the new one. So automobiles is one place it shows. And we're going to talk about the mechanism in which inflation introduces itself to these assets. But automobiles is one. You're 16 years old, you bought your first car. What is the median car price right now? It's got to be $35,000. Let me look that up. Median, let's see here. Median car price in the U.S. is, it's $37,000. That was as of March 2019. So every year, cars are getting more expensive, getting safer, all that sort of stuff. So now you're 16, you've got your car. What is the next thing that you must have in order to navigate the modern Western economy? You're 16 years old. What are you going to do next? Around 18, 19, you're going to end up where? Higher education, college. And I can tell you absolutely, unequivocally, a massive amount of inflation has appeared in colleges and universities. The price of tuition is ridiculous. And here's the other amazing thing. To go back to the devaluation of the dollar, there's been a devaluation of higher education. More people have degrees, less value degrees have. We get back from the break, I'm going to talk about the other two, and then I'm going to talk about that mechanism that's causing inflation in these 4 assets. It's Jason Bible, Texas Real Estate Radio Network. Welcome back to the show, Jason Bible, Texas Real Estate Radio Network. Today we're talking about inflation and the 4 assets it shows up in. The first one, we're gonna talk about this linearly as an American or a Western economy person goes through their life, where they're going to encounter the most inflation. First is car. That first automobile purchase is going to have a substantial amount of inflation in it. I'm going to talk about the mechanism where inflation intersects with these assets here in a minute, but I want to discuss these 4 things first. One is the automobile. Second, college tuition. I don't think anybody argues that college has gotten more expensive over the years. Now, there's some debate on, is a college degree really worth it at this point, given how expensive it is? I mean, how many folks are in $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 in debt for a liberal arts degree to get a job that pays them $50,000 a year? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Third place, inflation shows up. You're moving along here through life. You got your first car. You got your higher education. So you took on some debt for your car. You took on some debt for your education. So now you're out of college. You got a couple of years under your belt. Where's the next place inflation rears its ugly head? It's in housing. I am under no illusions that housing is absolutely has a substantial amount of inflation in it. Again, we're going to talk about the mechanism where that comes from in a minute. I just want to set the stage to talk about these 4 asset classes. Real estate. The appreciation that you're seeing in some of these markets, a significant portion of that is inflation. Too many dollars chasing too few deals. How do I know inflation's in real estate? Look at the cost of money. And we'll talk about the rest of that here in a minute. Keep that in mind. Going through life, 16 years old, you buy the car, you take on all this debt to buy the car, or maybe you pay cash for it. but it costs you a lot of money to buy it because guess what? Everybody else is buying it with debt. Then you go to college. College is really expensive. Maybe you can pay cash for it, but everybody else is taking on college debt. I'll tell you, I thank my parents all the time. They were able to pay for half of my college. I was able to pay for the other half. I had no college debt when I left college. That's very rare these days. It is tough for kids that don't get scholarships, that don't want to take on debt to go to school. It is really, really tough. So you graduate college. What's the next asset that you are likely to encounter that has a lot of inflation? The purchase of your first house. That first home you buy has a substantial amount of inflation in it. 15, 20% per year appreciation in some of these submarkets at the affordable house mark is absolutely inflation. So where's the fourth place that inflation shows up through higher prices? You're getting a little bit older. Maybe your kids are out of college. Now you're dipping into healthcare. The vast majority of your healthcare dollars will be spent on the last 6 months of your life. I'm going to say that again. The vast majority of your healthcare dollars will be spent on the last 6 months of your life. Bar none. That is 100% statistically true. Most of your healthcare dollars will be spent in the last 6 months of your life. So these four asset classes that we see the most inflation in: healthcare, higher education, automobiles, and real estate. Why is it just those four assets that experience the most inflation over the last 20 years? Here's the answer. You can use debt for all four of them. There are four things that you cannot operate without in a modern Western economy. Can you get by without a car? Yeah, kind of. I mean, if they've got good public transportation, but let's be honest. If you're taking Uber or a taxi or something, inflation is embedded in that cost of transportation somewhere. Whether it's subsidies through the government, let's say you're taking the Metro Rail, through property taxes and other state and local taxes, sales tax, for example, or you're purchasing your own vehicle, you're paying for that somewhere. Let me just give you a little side note here. A lot of people are all into gold. And I am sure, as I say this, there are shows on radio networks that we're on that these guys are all pro-gold. Or Bitcoin is another one. You can actually throw a lot of commodities into this bucket. One of the questions I always ask the commodity people, in particular gold bugs, is I say, okay, I should buy gold. I should have a certain percentage of my net worth in precious metals. Let's say all that's true. And then I'll ask why. Well, it's a hedge against inflation. Okay. Where does inflation come from? Well, it comes from too many dollars chasing too few assets. That's true. But then my question is, how much of your gold is really denominated in debt? Meaning, if gold is $2,000 an ounce, how much debt in dollars does it take for you to get that $2,000 an ounce out of the ground? And what you'll find is a lot of these gold mining companies and all the companies along that gold value chain take on a significant amount of debt to leverage higher rates of return. Meaning that $2,000 an ounce gold is really not worth $2,000. It's 2,000 leveraged dollars. But I don't need gold to live. I don't need Bitcoin to live. I do need an automobile to get around, whether I own it or somebody else owns it, but I'm not riding a bike everywhere. That automobile has a substantial amount of inflation in it because of the mechanism of debt that can be applied to it. I've got to live somewhere, real estate. I'm either renting a house, renting an apartment, even couch surfing with your mom. There's a cost associated with that. At some point, I'm going to be exposed to some ailments in my life. Typically, as we age, there's going to be a healthcare expense. Again, can't live without healthcare. If I'm going to be a productive citizen in a modern Western economy, I've got to be educated. So I've got to go to college. These 4 asset types, you cannot operate in a modern Western economy without them. Healthcare, higher education, automobiles, and real estate. Do I really need a laptop? Probably not. Do I really need I just got the new, whenever it came out, I was on the pre-order for it, the new Apple iPhone 12 mini. Absolutely love it. If you guys like small phones like the old iPhone SE, it's iPhone SE Part 2, and it's so great. But I don't need it to live. I can get a flip phone. I got to be able to communicate, but I can get a little flip phone. Do I need to buy this laptop? Do I need to have this beautiful studio? We didn't even have to build this studio. We were doing these broadcasts sitting in front of my laptop. However, we do need these 4 things: healthcare, higher education, automobiles, and real estate. We're going to talk about the impact on your portfolio and inflation when we get back from our breaks. Jason Bible, Texas Real Estate Radio Network. Oh, that was 4? Oh, all right. Well, all right. So I guess we'll talk about the rest of it tomorrow then. Thanks for watching, guys. That's hilarious. I thought it was